Is it possible that a child's spirit continues to grow on the other side? Could a 6-year-old child, for example, now be a teenager in that other dimension? We'll investigate, and along the way, find out about a boy who returned home 20 years after his death. Gloria Watts is a Y-Files viewer from London who contacted us after we ran a story about life after death. She believes that her son, Danny, who was killed in a road accident when he was 6, is still around her. But now he's a teenager. Her other son, Jason, has even seen him.
It was 2nd of January 1987. I was upstairs making the beds, and my children were downstairs stripping the Christmas tree. My daughter came upstairs and said that her brother, Jason, wasn't helping her. So I called him up and told him to put his toys away and to help her in. He went downstairs, and a few minutes later he came upstairs saying that he'd seen a naked man in the front room where Danny's picture is, and I can see through him.
I looked into the corner where my brother Danny's picture is, and I saw a figure which I could see through. I can remember seeing red on it, and I was quite frightened, so I looked away and then looked back, and it was just a puff of smoke.
I came downstairs to look with my children, and there was nothing there. I questioned Jason on what he'd seen, and he said that he'd looked back and it had gone up in smoke. I asked him if he was frightened, and he said, well, not really. And I asked why, and he said because the person was smiling, looking at the Christmas tree and was smiling.
But what was it that led Gloria to the conclusion that the apparition was that of her son Danny?
New Year's Day 1980, my 6.5-year-old son had been killed in the road outside. And every New Year's Day we went out of the house and stayed away all day. This was the 2nd of January, and when Jason came running up and telling me that he'd seen this man in the lounge who had gone up in smoke. From his description, the fact that he looked like Daddy but younger, we're quite convinced that it was Danny coming back, not to me or to my husband or to my daughter, but to somebody who hadn't been alive when he was alive. Really more of a way of proof that he had been seen, that he was here. The fact that Jason was a child and wouldn't have known any of these things about translucent, floating ghosts, is really proof to me that it must have been Danny.
I knew it was Danny because I said to my mum, it looked like my dad, but younger. And she always did look like my dad.
So, is it possible that Danny's spirit could have grown older after he died? We asked medium and paranormal investigator Graham Wiley to give us his opinion on the case.
Jason was only young when he saw the spirit. And what we've got to understand, that animals and children are the most receptive beings on this earth. So many cases people will say that a child is lonely or they've had too much supper, it's imagination. No. I've investigated many children and they've been able to describe the spirit in such detail it could not be in their imagination. Children's spirits seem strange because in many cases, when they return as a spirit or a ghost, let's call it, their age has been advanced. It's as if the growing process in the spirit world continues, but it's accelerating.
After the appearance of the ghost, the house returned to normal, but Gloria was still curious for answers to the question of who this apparition was.
In 1990, I had a clairvoyant here with 5 of my nursing colleagues. We thought we'd see if there was anything that come across for any of us. Some had lost their nans and granddads, and of course I'd lost Danny and was eager to have further proof. And the clairvoyant, whose name was Tom, came and sat at the table, and we each in turn went up to him, and he actually told me that he could feel the presence of a young man who was so close to me that it was almost hard to distinguish whether he was actually dead or alive. He then went on to say that he wanted to tickle me, to rub my back, and this is something my son Danny used to do for me.
The bond between a son or a daughter and the mother, a husband and wife, and a very close relative, that bond is very, very close. It's the bond of love. And in many, many cases, they were so happy with that person on earth, they become reluctant to make that step between earthly connections and the spirit.
He actually called him by his name, Danny, and then corrected himself, laughing, saying, "Oh no, he's telling me off. He wants to be called Daniel because he's a big boy now."
Invariably, they will come back and display some identity to a loved one. All they're trying to do is say, "Look, I'm here, I still love you, I haven't made that transgression and gone on."
Not long after Danny had died, my sisters came to stay with me to help look after the newborn baby, my little girl Corinne. And I'd gone up to Danny's room and there were sweets and toys there. And I decided that I couldn't throw the sweets away, but neither could I eat them. And I wondered really what I was going to do with them. There was 32 sweets in all. I'd counted them in twos, so there was definitely 32. Next morning I decided that maybe if there was enough sweets for the class that Danny had been in, that's somewhere that I could give the sweets. I phoned the school and the teacher told me that there had been 32 children in Danny's class, but now there was 31. I went up to count the sweets, and there was only 31. The night before, when my sisters and I had gone up to bed, outside Danny's bedroom there was a sweet wrapper on the floor. We didn't know how it had got there, but we know it was one of the sweets that I'd counted 32.
One of the things I did find out about this house is that it's up for sale. Now, this is important. If you can put yourself in the position that you're in the spirit world and you have a close loved one in that property. When you think that 99.9% of ghosts do not follow you, the spirit has a decision to make. Is it going to stay in a house where strangers are going to come? Or is it going to make that transgression and move into the spirit world?
The idea that the spirits of children who died continue to grow in that other world is one that's believed by many psychics. If you believe it or you don't believe it, there is one thing we can say about this story. It does give us some hope that perhaps there really is life after death. And when we lose our loved ones, it really isn't the end.
I'm sure that if their life's cut short here, they must go on and grow somewhere else.